So I'm just going to pass you over to Saray to talk a bit about those real life experiences and applications of learning particular histories in the classroom and the impact that this can have.
Thank you, Izzy. So as you can see, we have an illustration here of slaves being branded. So this is the Atlantic slave trade. And from case studies of families that we've worked with that have basically experienced racism, this sort of topic, a conversation or learning within the curriculum can often be a omitting factor of why the racism initially happens. So we have supported children that have experienced this racism, whereby as a result of being involved in the classroom discussion about slavery, this child was then picked on by his peers that were non-Black and basically called cotton picker. So if we look at the information that the children are accessing, the demographics of the classroom, and the impact that this can have. So another example that we have is a child that was looking at, Black history. It was Black History Month and looking at the Atlantic slave trade. And within that, they were made to watch 12 Years a Slave, and then write a diary entry of which they had to then express how they felt being a slave and what their experiences would be based on this film. Now, bearing in mind, this film is, it's factual, but it's still fictional in a sense. So what this teacher was trying to do is trying to engage and get that thought and feeling from the students. But in actuality, it was misleading because, as we know, to be a slave and read and write was death by punishment. So, slaves would definitely not want to be exposed as being able to read and write. So that in itself is misleading. And second of all, it's starting with the narrative of Black history starts with the slave trade, and that in itself can be quite demeaning. It can also be oppressive, and it can write the narrative that there was no history before the Atlantic slave trade, and it's looking at these individuals as being commodities, as not being human, as being lower than their white counterparts. So it is all about you being a teacher that has an understanding and being mindful of the way in which you teach Black history. Where do you go with Black history? How far back do you go with history? How are you engaging your students? And what the implications of this material could be. Is it going to encourage racism or, ignorant statements and treatments to those that are Black or people of color? And then we have to look at, how does that make that pupil feel? Are they going to feel isolated? Are they going to feel some level of alienation? And almost like it's all eyes on them because they are also people of color. And, it's that, oh, well, you must know how this feels. And this is just from case studies of, like I said, working with children and their families and their experiences within the school. So we just want you to be mindful and think about exactly what it is when teaching Black history, what it looks like, how you go about it, what materials and resources that you use, and the narrative, the message that you're sending to young people in general. So thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, I think really important points that bring it really back to the importance of self-analysis in this area, the content that you're teaching and delivering, making sure that you know and understand your own education in that area, and that actually with this content, how this is going to be taken outside of those school walls, outside of the classroom, the impact that is going to have on different children from different backgrounds and different identities, and that you fully understand that. So building on that, I think it's really important to extend our understanding of a young person's perspective in this area and the impact that bias and privilege and a lack of representation, all these different things when it comes to content delivery, can have into adulthood and early adulthood. So this video sums it up really well in a really artistic way, actually, that represents the opinions of young people and the process that you go through of questioning your own education and learning, and whether this has actually benefited your own understanding of yourself and the world you see around you.
Class, right, can we settle down? Rose, turn around, please. We've got a lot to get through today. Okay, so carrying on from our lesson last week, we were looking at the key divisions in the early stages of the civil rights movement and the general impact across the board. Sam, come on. Sit up straight. Right, stop slouching. This is the perfect opportunity for you to engage, so make the most of it.
Well, we learn the same stuff every year for Black History Month. Every single October, we learn the same things, either apartheid, slavery, or the civil rights. How many of you guys have actually learned something new these last years? See? That's what I mean.
Sam, this is our history. Come on, man.
No, seriously. Do you guys know anything about Ralph Bunche, the first black person to win a Nobel Prize? Or that the richest person ever lived was a black man named King Musa I of Mali? What about Ella Baker? What about Ella Baker? One of the most influential women of the civil rights movement. This is why I can't take Black History Month seriously, man.
But Samuel, the curriculum is designed to help you think about Black history critically.
Actually, miss, it's designed to teach us what to think, not how to think. For example, when that light switched, you taught us it was Thomas Edison who made that happen, when ironically it was actually a darker man who made that light flick, Lewis Latimer to be precise. Quite nice when you're talking about Mr. Hamilton and his racing car, but red light stopped. We're always taught that Martin Luther King had a dream, man. But those dreams can't be achieved because our brains are in chains, our minds are enslaved, so we won't get our redemption. Morgan, free man. Will we ever be free, man? And leave this state of imprisonment? And take that walk of free, damn it, green man from a traffic light invented by the same man who made gas masks to protect our organs. Another free man named Garrett Morgan. But I bet you never knew that. We need to open our minds. But how can we be taught to see if the blind lead the blind? The first person to develop significant eye surgery was a black woman named Dr. Patricia E. Barth. Now on that note, there's a question I must ask. If this is a great opportunity to learn and be engaged about our past, why are we not actually being taught about our past? Transatlantic slavery, where we're taught Black history starts, but is it really? There seems to be a lot you haven't told us. And you shut down and hold back on the bold ones who stand against the way you're trying to mold us. Consistent enemies of progress. You're surprised because I know things you don't expect me to know yet. And when I tell you you're wrong for telling me about me, you call it a riot while I call it a protest. The Broadwater Farm riots. The media exacerbate and make it seem like it's a bunch of delinquent youths on the streets, when really the first cause and trigger was death at the hands of the police. We cease to know information and the truth. And that's simply because you withhold information from the youth. Maybe one day we'll be satisfied with how our knowledge of history equates. Well, I'm sure like me, you're waiting for the teacher to fill in that space. So do so then.
So I think this is a really good representation of often the internal monologue that people have once they reach a certain stage in their life, where they look back and they question their education. And it should reach a point where actually a young adult or an older adult is able to identify the impact that their teachers have had on their lives and the learning and benefits that they've received from being in schooling. And so we need to ensure that actually, as our roles as teachers, as educators, as influencers in children's lives, that all those exchanges are meaningful and beneficial and representative and inclusive of all these voices. And something that was touched on in the video as well, and something that Soraya touched on, was that these voices of different backgrounds, of different diverse cultures, these voices were present well before the transatlantic slave period. So thinking about, are we giving our learners the opportunity to benefit from that understanding of everyone else's histories and their own histories? Are we teaching and allowing learners to learn more about innovation in different areas and inspiration, and be inspired and empowered by the different histories that stray from those traumatic, dark histories, and actually promote those positive and inspiring histories that we know are there? So taking that on to more of a technical deconstructive term is this term decolonisation, and really what anti-racism, part of that, what is part of embedding anti-racism into a culture is deconstructing a colonial legacy that still to this day becomes entrenched in content and learning, and allows biases to continue to breed and thrive. And really decolonisation surrounds looking at power relations, how we reflect on the content we teach, what we learn, how it's different in all fields. And really it's about deconstructing and decolonising our own thought, that actually, for example, European history isn't at the top of the hierarchy, that there are lots of different histories that intersect and have different impacts upon each other, that have just as much a place in our history books, but to take away that colonial way of thinking, to place borders around our learning and teaching of history, for example, that confine different histories and theories and thoughts to a certain group of people or a place, that doesn't take into account the diverse thoughts and experiences and voices of people that have had influence in all these different areas. So a quote from Aberquinaziz, who is from the Social Sciences School of Cardiff University. He says, you go into Cardiff University's Morgan building and there are statues of Greek heroes, and then you go into the committee rooms and there are portraits of white men. We're showing students what's right and what's wrong, what you're allowed to say, what you're not. So it's much more than what you say and what you deliver. It's just as important to present diverse and inclusive images and actions as well, just as important as it is to put wordplay onto things and verbally commit to things. And also it's about creating an environment in which the students know it's okay to challenge and ask questions, that actually, of course, there's factual content, but actually that's open to perception and subjectivity, and that it's okay to challenge and question if there's concerns, questions, queries or thoughts, hypotheses that learners may have. And it's good to build onto that, because it's all part of finding out your own self-identity, and working out those identities and kind of structures of those around you as well. So this is a quick video as well that has some university students talking about decolonisation and what they understand that to be, just to enhance a little bit more of this conversation on decolonisation and what that process is.
What people mean when they say decolonising the curriculum is diversifying the curriculum, which means to include scholarship and work and perspectives from the global south.
So rather than focusing on one perspective only, for example, the perspective of the colonizer, it'd be better to also focus on the perspective of the people that were colonized.
I'm a physics student, and you might think, oh, what has physics got to do with race? But when we're taught about physics, we're always taught about the the historical context through which the ideas came about. And we're never taught about why the Enlightenment happened in Europe.
For instance, in geography, if you're learning about feminist theories and literature, it's important that you include queer feminist literature and intersectional feminist literature and literature from people from different backgrounds to make it a holistic understanding. So it's not just focused on one narrative and it's not homogeneous, because that's not how real life is.
For me, medicine is talk about different conditions. So different conditions present in different ways in different skin colors, for example. We're taught that jaundice is, yellow skin, and you get, yellow eyes. But that's not the same for if you're, Asian or black, because my skin is not going to exactly get yellower.
There's a lot going on at the moment about black women pregnancies, the ratio between white women and black women who have miscarriages. Question goes, is it because, some midwives are just not as educated in what a black woman goes through when she's pregnant and how that might present for a black woman, because black women are more prone to having high blood pressure when they're pregnant, diabetes when they're pregnant. It's something that I'm also passionate about going into nursing, because it's something that I want to put out there. As a healthcare professional, you are going to be exposed to so much and so many different kinds of people that you need that education.
A lot of the pushback from decolonizer curriculum always comes from individuals that believe that you're almost diluting history and the way you're teaching things, and you're not focusing on the right things. But in retrospect, the point of education is to widen your viewpoints. In actual fact, it's actually a better way to educate.
Decolonizing the curriculum is about opening up the curriculum to more perspectives and more works. Academic freedom, basically, which is a freedom of speech issue, but the people who argue about freedom of speech never say anything about decolonizing the curriculum. They usually say the opposite, which is quite funny.
We're not saying that forget white people, of course not. That's not a thing. We're just saying that, hello, we're here, we want to be recognized.
The crux of the matter is the fact that you're going to be adding to history and you're going to actually enrich it, because you're going to have multiple perspectives. And, how is that not beneficial to anyone? You don't only learn how the war went from England's perspective, or how the war only went from Germany's perspective, because you'd never understand why the war started, for example. It's always important to...
So some really important points made there, and that the point of decolonisation is to eliminate that hierarchy when we're thinking about delivering content and including voices, to take the hierarchy out of that, and to take a colonial way of thinking out of that. And a key thing that was mentioned as well, that key term intersectional, something that, again, that we touched on in the first session, taking an intersectional approach to teaching a subject area is part of that decolonisation process, making sure that you're including all those voices and not just taking one narrative into account, as they said.
What people...
So I'll pass over to Saray to talk a bit about a bit of a discussion opportunity to talk about what are some ways of identifying inclusive and representative literature.
Yeah, so as Izzy has highlighted, it's looking at ways within your own practice, that is inclusive and representative. So just going back to the drawing board, really, having a look at what materials you already have, what materials you could already build on, what materials you need to get rid of, really, that is counterproductive and not inclusive, and that is going to be excluding, whitewashing, Eurocentric. All these things that we've highlighted today, I think it's important that we take that time to reflect and just look about where we've been, where we are now, and where we need to go in respect of inclusive, diversifying, decolonizing. There's all these words, but in essence, it's just about being inclusive, being representative, and just making sure that education is for everyone and it is representation of all perspectives, all contributions, and all originators. So with that being said, just take time, have a little thought, maybe get a little plan together, and work towards a plan, take those steps. And it would be good to hear from you and what you've come up with. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, and if at any point you wanted to pause this recording, take some notes down, or whether you're in a group setting, you want to actually discuss that question a bit further and make it into a discussion point. Thinking about, if we're trying to find and identify inclusive and representative literature, things like who's the author of that resource in that literature? What do we know about the author? Do they often talk about the importance of inclusion, decolonisation? Do we know their ethos and their values? Which can often give us an indication as to what that content is going to look like from them, and whether we can rely on that narrative. And also thinking about just taking our instinct into account based on our professional learning. So looking at that content, are there lots of diverse images represented in there that represent lots of different groups and races and abilities of people, and does it stay within the borders of an area of a region, or does it draw on different things and backgrounds and facts from different regions that place people and voices in a positive light and as part of that story? So taking that instinct into account and taking as much professional learning as you've engaged in, as Soraya said, just really important to think through that and not to bypass the importance of resources in literature and the impact that this can have on children, that actually it's probably having a lot more of an impact that you may be aware of on children and their perceptions of what they're learning in themselves. So finally, just a commitment to act for us at the end of the day. Some recommendations from us. Please do actively seek out opportunities for your own continued professional learning. As we've mentioned, this is just an introductory version of our series. We do provide full version programs of each of the topic areas that we do cover. So please do contact us if you are interested in being involved in some of those programs and professional learning that can be made bespoke to your institution and your needs. Practice what it means to be anti-racist. Make sure that you're using action over words, and that you know the difference between non-racism and anti-racism, and that's clear in your actions, and that's represented in the culture of your institution, and you've got that intention there. Initiate conversation, take your learning outside of the school walls. Anything that you've prompted thought on today, anything that has sparked your thought and your learning, please do take that outside to your family, your peers, continue these conversations, because those conversations are absolutely part of your continued learning and your understanding and perception of others. And finally, utilise the post-session material. We'll be sending out copies of the slides to attendees that did register, and we've got some really good post-session material for you to engage with. So please do utilise that. We've got all different types of formats available, whether you're a visual learner, videos, you like reports to read, or if you're quite an auditory learner, like a podcast in the background. There's loads of different things to engage with, and we've got those resources there for you. So if you were someone that did register with Eventbrite to attend, you will be receiving those soon. Finally, please do contact us if you've got any questions at all. Our details are on the screen, so please do pause and get in contact with us if you have any questions. Follow us on Twitter. That's where we're often most active and providing updates as well. Our website is under construction, and we'll be launching that soon. So more information about our services and new projects that are upcoming. So please do keep updated with that, and we can notify you when that's up. In terms of the DARPL project, any questions regarding the DARPL project in particular, and the different work streams that we may be involved in or might be available to you, please do contact Chantal Horton, who's the project director of DARPL. So any questions, please do direct to there. But in the meantime, any questions that you have, any thoughts you'd like to share with us, any ideas, anything at all, or conversations you'd like to spark with us, we're always happy to receive any of those, and would love to engage in as much conversation with you as possible. So unless anything's anything that you wanted to close with, I think we'll be saying goodbye.
No, we just want to say thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate that it is hard right now as far as restrictions and having the time, but you engaging, being informed, it's only just going to be able for you to build on that knowledge and benefit yourselves as well as your institution. So thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much.